At a small drive-in diner, things are about to get heated. A group of cheeky bikers, thinking they can mess with anyone, pick the wrong person to target. As they make snide comments and push boundaries, they have no idea who's sitting just a few tables away. Enter the Army Ranger, a man with years of discipline, training, and a calm demeanor that hides a fierce side. What starts as innocent teasing soon escalates into a confrontation that no one saw coming. Will these bikers get away with their mischief, or will the Army Ranger teach them a lesson they'll never forget? Stick around to find out how this tense situation unfolds and who walks away with the last laugh. Trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking turn of events in the next part. The bikers, a rough and tumble crew, had always prided themselves on their loud bikes and tough attitude. They loved making a scene wherever they went, pushing people to the limit. But today, they weren't prepared for the quiet man sitting alone in the corner booth. The Army Ranger, in his late 30s, was no stranger to conflict. His years of service had shaped him into someone who rarely showed emotion. But that didn't mean he was willing to let the bikers' disrespect slide. As the bikers continued to make jokes at his expense, the air in the diner grew thicker. The ranger's eyes didn't leave his meal, but the tension in the room was palpable. It was clear the bikers were getting bolder, sensing his calm was just that, calm, not weakness. With every word, they pushed the line further. The ranger's silence only made them bolder, but something told everyone in the diner this wasn't going to end the way they expected. The diner's atmosphere had shifted from casual chatter to something more charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The bikers, sensing the ranger's calm, couldn't resist pushing harder. One of them, the leader, a tall guy with a thick beard, swaggered up to the counter, leaning in close to the ranger's table. "What's the matter, soldier? Lost your voice?" he taunted, flicking a fry onto the table. The others snickered, egging him on. But the ranger didn't flinch. His hands remained steady around his cup of coffee, his eyes locked on the far wall, as if deep in thought. Yet something was shifting in the air. His body language was a silent warning, and even the loudest biker in the group could sense it. In the corner, a waitress nervously wiped down the counter, watching the scene unfold, torn between stepping in and letting it play out. She had seen trouble before, but never quite like this. The tension was thicker now, as the bikers circled, slowly closing in. What they didn't know was that this ranger had faced far worse threats than a few rowdy bikers. He wasn't intimidated easily. Back at the table, one of the younger bikers, a guy with a patch over his eye, looked at the leader uncertainly. "You sure this is a good idea?" he muttered under his breath. But the leader just shot him a look that silenced him. This was their turf, and they weren't about to back down now. But in the back of his mind, the young biker had an unsettling feeling. Something told him they were messing with the wrong person. As the ranger finally lifted his eyes from his coffee, his stare locked onto the leaders. And for a brief moment, it was as if time stood still. The standoff wasn't just between bikers and soldiers. It was about respect, power, and something deeper. Neither side was willing to give an inch. The silence in the diner was deafening, broken only by the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of the jukebox in the corner. The bikers' laughter had faded, replaced by a nervous energy that seemed to ripple through the room. Every eye was on the ranger, who hadn't moved, his expression unreadable. But those who were paying close attention saw something else in his posture, a quiet intensity that told them he wasn't afraid. The leader of the bikers leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a taunting whisper. "You think you can just sit here, all calm and collected, like you own this place. You think you intimidate me." For a split second, the ranger's hand twitched, and the whole diner seemed to hold its breath. The young biker, still standing in the back, felt his stomach tighten. Something was off. He'd seen his fair share of scuffles, but this felt different. He'd been around enough to know when a person was ready to snap. And it wasn't just the ranger's years of service that gave him that feeling. It was the way he carried himself. He wasn't the kind of guy to throw the first punch. But when pushed too far, he'd strike back with a force they wouldn't see coming. The leader wasn't backing down, though. He continued his mocking, trying to goad the ranger into reacting. The other bikers gathered closer, emboldened by their leader's confidence. But even in their numbers, there was a hesitation, an uncertainty they couldn't quite shake off. The waitress watched, frozen in place, knowing something was about to go down. She had heard stories of bikers making trouble, but she never imagined it would escalate this way. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the ranger stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, cutting through the air like a warning. The bikers' laughter stopped instantly. Every eye was locked on the ranger, who, for the first time, allowed himself a small but unmistakable smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. For a moment, no one moved. The room was a snapshot of raw tension, every breath held, waiting for the next move. Just as the ranger's movement snapped the tension into sharp focus, the unexpected happened. From the back door of the diner, a figure stepped in, unnoticed by the bikers who were fixated on their prey. The figure was tall, wearing a faded leather jacket and a baseball cap that concealed most of his face. But it was the way he moved, with a calm yet determined presence that immediately drew attention. The bikers were too caught up in their own bravado to notice the newcomer at first. But the ranger did. His eyes shifted ever so slightly, recognizing the man who had just walked in. A fleeting moment of surprise passed across his face before he regained his composure. The newcomer didn't make a scene. He simply walked up to the counter, ordered a coffee, and sat down at the far end of the diner, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But the atmosphere had changed. The bikers, now distracted by this strange newcomer, started whispering among themselves. The leader's bravado faltered for a brief second. His eyes darted between the ranger and the new figure, a sense of unease settling in. Something about this felt off. The young biker, the one who had been silently observing everything, felt the tension spike once more. He had a bad feeling. This wasn't just about two men facing off anymore. The newcomer's presence seemed to shift the entire dynamic, but no one was sure how or why. And as the bikers continued to look at the new guy with growing suspicion, they began to wonder if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. The ranger, still standing, made no move to engage with the new arrival. But his eyes kept flicking over, as if waiting for something. The silence in the diner thickened, and the sense of impending conflict hung heavy in the air. Whatever was about to unfold, it was clear that things were escalating in ways no one could have predicted. The room seemed to hold its breath as the newcomer sat there, calm and unmoving. The bikers were growing restless, unsure of what to do next. The leader, his face flushed with frustration, finally broke the silence with a sharp chuckle. "What's the deal? You two in cahoots or something?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, but there was a new wariness in his tone. The ranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he finally looked directly at the leader, his calm expression shifting into something sharper. "You should have stopped while you had the chance," he said quietly, but with a weight to his words that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Before the leader could respond, the newcomer at the counter stood up. His movements were deliberate, and when he turned to face the group of bikers, the room seemed to quiet even further. He removed his cap, revealing a face familiar to the ranger, a face that made the bikers freeze in place. The newcomer wasn't just some random guy. He was another Army Ranger, a former teammate of the one standing by the window. Thought you could get away with this, the second ranger said, his voice low and steady. I'm afraid you've miscalculated. The leader's smug expression faltered, confusion flashing across his face. Who the hell are you? He sneered, but the bikers behind him were now shifting uneasily as the realization began to dawn. The second ranger stepped forward, his movements fluid and controlled. We've been watching you for a while now, he said. Messing with people who've served this country, that's where you cross the line. In that moment, it all clicked for the bikers. The calmness of the first ranger, the sudden appearance of his old comrade, and the unsettling certainty in their eyes. These men weren't just soldiers. They were a team, and together they were far more dangerous than the bikers had ever anticipated. The leader's bravado crumbled, and for the first time, he took a step back. The other bikers began to shuffle nervously, their cocky demeanor melting away. But just as the situation seemed to settle into a tense quiet, the unexpected twist came. The young biker, the one who had been hesitant all along, suddenly stood up. His face was pale, his hands trembling. I can't do this anymore, he muttered, his voice barely audible. The leader turned to him, eyes blazing with anger. What's your problem? But the young biker wasn't looking at him. His gaze was locked on the two Army Rangers, who stood united, unshaken. I didn't sign up for this. You've gone too far, the young biker said, his voice growing stronger. With that, he walked toward the door, leaving behind the life he'd known. And as the door swung open behind him, the tension in the diner finally snapped. The bikers were left standing, divided, unsure of how to proceed. The ranger and his old teammate exchanged a glance, their job done. They'd stood their ground, and in the end, it was the bikers who were left questioning their choices. With a final look around the diner, the two men walked out together, leaving behind the chaos and the uncertainty. But just before the door closed behind them, the young biker's voice echoed from outside, as if he were calling out to them from a distance. Thank you. As the door clicked shut behind the two Army Rangers, the diner fell into a quiet that seemed to linger in the air. The bikers, now disbanded and defeated, were left in a mix of confusion and regret. The leader, once full of bravado, sat down at a booth, his shoulders slumped. He had underestimated the wrong people. The younger biker, who had walked away, had already disappeared into the night. He knew he couldn't be part of this anymore. He had witnessed a side of himself he hadn't known was there, a side that still believed in doing what was right. Inside the diner, the waitress breathed a sigh of relief. She had seen trouble before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a confrontation. It was about respect, courage, and standing up when it mattered most. And as the Rangers disappeared into the night, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that for once, the right side had won.